Hello guys, welcome to another video, and apologies for not making many videos since League start. I've been a bit sick, but I wanted to make one now talking about the new currency item, the Volatile Vaal Orb. Now, Path of Exile 2 players will recognise this one for the functionality in that game for the normal Vaal Orb when used on unique items, which has an outcome that can roll a very similar effect. But for Path of Exile 1, this is a brand new functionality. Now, what does the Volatile Vaal Orb actually do? So, when you use this item onto a unique, it will first roll a 50-50 check to see whether the item gets destroyed or not. If you succeed, the item survives, and if you don't, the item is deleted. Now, if you pass that check, you'll move on to the next step, which is a Divine Orb function, and essentially, your item will have a Divine Orb used on it, and the modifiers that have roll ranges will have their ranges randomly rolled. Now, only after that step will you move on to the final stage, which is the application of a multiplier on modifier magnitudes, which rolls between 0.78 and 1.22, and it rolls in increments of 0.01. So this is essentially the exact same range that happens in Path of Exile 2 with that particular outcome on the Vaal Orb. And this means that you can obtain modifiers with values that previously were completely unobtainable. And something really important to note here, which is very, very powerful, is that this modifier magnitude scalar is actually multiplicative with any other effects that cause the same outcome. So things like quality and heist enchantments, for example, to name a few, which will actually already scale the modifier range. Well, that is a multiplier on top of that, so it's not additive with that. That does mean that you can obtain some ridiculous items using this currency item in the game now. And I wanted to actually do this video and just provide some examples of crazy items that you can now obtain. So this is not an extensive list of all the best items that you can use this new currency item on. In fact, there are plenty of others that you can make use of here. But I just wanted to point out some ridiculous ones to, highlight how good this item really can be. Now, do keep in mind that all of these items here are theoretical maximums that you can achieve. And realistically, you're probably not going to get this unless you are really, really lucky. And even beyond that, this is going to be extremely expensive to do in a lot of cases because you have to actually have the item and then you have to potentially sacrifice the item. Every time you actually use a Volatile Vaal Orb, you essentially need 2 of the base item to actually obtain 1 successful outcome because of that first roll that will also delete the item if it rolls the 50% to delete it. And therefore, this is a very expensive endgame scaling thing, but it can be extremely powerful, so let's look through a few of those examples. So first of all, we have Ynda's Stand, which is a belt. It comes exclusively from King's March shipping, and this one can already be modified with the defense catalyst for 20%. That brings the base 50% up to 60%, and then with a max modifier range on that Volatile Vaal Orb, you would be able to get this to 73%. So you'd gain ward from 73% from the equipped body armor instead of those stats, and that potentially means a ridiculous amount of ward is obtainable now in the game, much more than you could previously get, especially considering there is now also a timeless jewel, a brand new timeless jewel in the game, which I'm going to be talking about in some future videos, which is called Heroic Tragedy. That one has a bunch of new scaling vectors for ward as well. Then we have the Kaom's Heart, of course, a classic body armor. I believe that you cannot use heist enchantments on this one because it kind of throws up an error message there because it doesn't have sockets. Regardless though, if you hit the highest Vaal Orb on that one, you'll get plus 1,220 maximum life. That is crazy. That would be really nice, for example, in the build that I played last league, which I may end up re-rolling into this league, we'll have to wait and see, which is the Totem build that I used Kaom's Heart on. That would just be a bonus 220 life that I didn't have in that patch. Then we have Marylene's Fallacy. Shout out to Neversing, who actually posted his Marylene's Fallacy, which was very close to the maximum that you can roll. So that is absolutely insane. That's really lucky. And this one has a base roll of up to 240% added global crit multi. But it has the downside there of the less critical strike chance, of course. The way you get around that is by making it so that you actually guarantee critical hits. For example, the new belt can grant you the Shrine that always guarantees critical hits. or you could use something like the Transfigured Glacial Hammer, which guarantees a critical hit on every third strike. But this one right here, once again, you can use Catalyst to bring that critical quality up. I think you can get to around 280 or 285%, something like that. And then if you hit that maximum range roll, you could bring it up to plus 351% to global crit multi. That is just absurd. What a ridiculous amulet. Again, very unlikely to actually get to that maximum range, but still just showing the potential of that item. Then we have the Grey Wind, which was only added in the last patch, drops exclusively from the new Breach bosses. And this one usually only rolls up to 12% of players' maximum life for the added fire damage component. But you can, of course, scale this up by an extra 1% there with the Heist enchantment. And then if you were to have that and you roll the maximum Volatile Vaal Orb magnitude, you would be able to get this up to 16% of player maximum life. So that's an extra third on the scaling that you would previously have had, which is, again, just absurd in terms of damage output. Then we have the Ephemeral Edge, which is in the same vein there as the Grey Wind. The interesting thing about this one is that it was actually nerfed in a previous patch, and it used to be 20% of added maximum lightning damage based on player maximum energy shield, and this one is now rolling between 10 and 15%. So if you were to have the 15% after the Divine Orb, and then you hit the maximum Volatile Vaal Orb range, inclusive of that 15% increased explicit lightning modifier magnitude heist enchantment, you could get this up to 21%. So it would actually be better than the pre-nerf maximum on that range. Then we have Essentia Sanguis, which was actually buffed in this patch to have a crazy lightning damage range. It now rolls between 1 and I think it goes up to 850 on the max range roll there. Well, if you had the Heist modifier magnitude enchant and the Volatile Vaal Orb on top, you could get this to 1,192 top-end lightning damage. And I wanted to just show off on this other version here the maximum energy shield roll, because that one goes up to 300 on the normal item now. And it is quite an interesting item, Essentia Sanguis. But with the corruption there, you could get up to 366. That is a lot of flat energy shield to be gaining from a weapon especially. So that's an interesting item there. Then we have Voidforge, again, talking about aspirational, ridiculous endgame items. I mean, this one here, if you get that Heist modifier magnitude, you can already get up to, I think, 800 or 805%. And with a crazy corruption outcome, this is what you could get. 982% of weapon physical damage as extra damage of a random element on each attack. That is absolutely wild. And speaking of wild, we have the Winds of Fate there. 1,770 DPS staff with this crazy range here. Again, that's the Heist enchantment and the Vaal Orb combined. And once again, that would be something similar to the Marylene's Fallacy amulet we discussed earlier. You kind of want to use this alongside things that can guarantee critical strikes. And we have two very strong ones here that I think will be used quite often. You know, all of these that I've just kind of mentioned here, I think they're all a little bit niche. You know, we've got the life stacking from the Kaom's Heart, we've got the Wars stacking from Ynda's Stand. Again, like life stacking things here. Even Essentia Sanguis, not going to see it used very often. You're very rarely going to ever see a Voidforge like this. However, I think one thing that a lot of people will be doing is trying to get the modifier on both the Lightning Coil and the Cloak of Flame up, because both of these are very, very powerful defensively, and these items are both not particularly rare. So actually making use of this new currency item in regards to these two items to try and get a better outcome there, I think this is going to be fairly common. So we have the Cloak of Flame, which can now theoretically roll up to 49% of physical damage taken as fire damage. Notably, that one also works for damage over time, so that's very strong. And there's also the Lightning Coil there, which can go from the base 50% up to 61% of physical damage from hits taken as lightning damage. So I think there is now several ways in the game that you can obtain 100% of physical hit damage taken as elemental. So both of those are quite strong, and I expect to see quite a few people actually using those in their builds. Then we have the Brass Dome. I wanted to throw this one in here because this is kind of an honourable mention for the fact of it having two modifiers that scale very, very well with the Volatile Vaal Orb outcome. And obviously, you're extremely unlikely to get both of these hitting their maximum. But I wanted to throw it in here anyway. You know, this is a 6,000 armor, body armor, along with +6 to all maximum elemental resistances. and the take no extra damage from critical strikes. Crazy item. There's also the Doppelganger Guise there, which is the Maven exclusive body armor drop. This one is actually quite an interesting body armor when you pair it with something like Divine Flesh. And the modifier rolling up to 49% less physical and chaos damage taken while sane, which is all the time if you actually don't use the unhinged skill. That's quite powerful. Once again, a powerful item defensively. And lastly, I've put the Black Zenith unique gloves in here as something that I found kind of interesting because this is an item which is barely used. It's only really used in Flamewood builds. And for that particular build, this would be a ridiculous improvement because you go from firing 4 additional projectiles to 5. You'd also gain a lot of extra more damage there as well on top. Whilst you don't really care about the cooldown because the way you play that build is you constantly resummon the totems after they've actually used their skill once. So that one could be quite interesting there as well. But honestly, so many crazy unique items. I would have to do like 10 or 15 videos like this just to go through a bunch of the really notable ones. There are just so many interesting options, and what a crazy item to add to the game. I feel like GGG just really understand their audience at this point. They know what people like in Path of Exile 1. They know they have a lot of old school players, people that have been playing the game for a long time, and they just want to provide them with all of these crazy options to make interesting builds, especially as you progress further and further into a league and you have more and more currency to expend on these types of things. So the Volatile Vaal Orb, such an interesting addition to the game. Makes for some really crazy endgame items. What do you guys think of this new currency item? Let me know about any that I've missed in this video. Obviously, I've missed a ton, so write them down in the comments below. Thanks for watching this video, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.